All right, so welcome back everyone for another deep dive, and today we are looking at the world of PC gaming.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, always fun. And specifically, we are going to be looking at Nvidia's latest and greatest, the RTX 5070.
Okay.
We've got a really in-depth review from Ars Technica, and reading through it, the marketing hype around this card is like off the charts.
Is, yeah.
So we're going to break it all down for you and try and see if this card really lives up to the hype, you know?
For sure. And I think it's especially interesting because, Jensen Huang, Nvidia's CEO, he came out with some pretty bold statements like 4090 performance at $549.
Yeah, 549.
And remember the 4090, that was their like top tier card, the beast, in terms of performance. And it was significantly more expensive.
Yeah.
So the idea that you could get that level of power for a fraction of the price is pretty enticing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge claim if it's true. It's a game changer, yeah, for PC gaming. But Ars Technica, they took a deep dive, and it seems like there might be more to the story.
Yeah, there's definitely a bit more to the story because essentially what NVIDIA is doing is they're playing this like clever marketing game.
Yeah.
They're using this new technology called AI frame generation to reach those performance numbers.
Right.
So essentially they're using AI to create extra frames between the ones the card actually renders.
Okay, so more frames.
More frames, exactly. So it's clever, but it's not quite the same as just raw rendering power?
So they're kind of comparing apples to oranges a little bit,
Yeah, it's not a completely fair comparison.
making it seem like it's more powerful than it actually is.
Exactly. They're comparing the AI-boosted performance to the 4090's raw performance.
Gotcha.
So yeah, not apples to apples.
Okay, so what's the 5070's actual performance then? Like compared to, say, last generation's 4070 Super? Because that's probably what a lot of people are wondering. Like,
Right.
how does it compare to what I might already have?
Yeah, well, according to Ars Technica, and they put it through its paces, it's only slightly better than the 4070 Super, so not a huge leap forward given all the marketing?
Huh, so maybe not the 4090 killer we were promised then.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's definitely something to be aware of.
Okay, so what else did the review uncover?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting and maybe a little bit concerning depending on your perspective.
Okay.
The 5070, it actually uses more power than the 4070 Super.
No way.
Yeah, we're talking 250 watts compared to 220 watts.
So more power, but not that much more performance.
Exactly. And that's despite the performance gains being pretty minimal?
It seems a little counterintuitive. Why would they do that?
Well, essentially what they've done is they've pushed the clock speeds higher to try and squeeze out those extra frames.
Okay.
So it's kind of like pushing a car engine harder. You might get more speed, but you're going to burn more fuel.
Yeah, you got to pay for it somehow.
Exactly. And in this case, the fuel is electricity.
Right. So for someone actually thinking about buying this card, is that power consumption something to be concerned about?
I think it depends on your priorities. For some people, a slight performance bump might be worth a little extra power draw.
Sure.
But for others, especially those who are concerned about energy costs or their environmental footprint, it's definitely something to consider.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say you are a gamer, primarily playing at 1440p resolution,
Yeah.
which is, pretty common these days.
Yeah.
How does the 5070 stack up in that regard?
Well, based on the review, it's a good fit for 1440p.
Okay.
You'll get smooth frame rates, a really great visual experience.
Great.
But for 5K gaming, you'll likely need to rely on DLSS, which is NVIDIA's upscaling technology to really hit those high frame rates.
Okay, so speaking of competition,
Yeah.
how about AMD? Their new Radeon RX 9070 series is coming out soon, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's aiming for the same price point as the 5070.
Right.
How do you think that's going to shake things up for NVIDIA?
Well, AMD has been making some serious moves in the GPU market lately.
Yeah, they have.
So this could be a real contender. We'll have to wait for the benchmarks. But if it performs well, it's going to put a lot of pressure on NVIDIA.
Okay, so before we get ahead of ourselves, let's go back to Ars Technica's testing.
Okay.
They used Cyberpunk 2077 as one of their examples, right?
It did, yeah.
How did the 5070 handle that?
It did pretty well in Cyberpunk, especially compared to older cards like the 4070. But they did find some unusual results when they had overdrive mode on and DLSS off.
Okay.
Both in Cyberpunk and Horizon Zero Dawn, they reported those issues to NVIDIA, so hopefully we'll see some driver updates or fixes.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
All right, so you mentioned overdrive mode. Can you explain what that is for those of us who aren't super tech savvy?
Yeah, so basically, overdrive lets you push the card's clock speeds even higher than the factory settings.
Gotcha.
So you can potentially get a few extra frames per second, but it also increases power consumption and heat.
Right. So higher risk, higher reward.
Exactly. It's a trade-off.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
so it's like pushing that car engine even harder, but risking overheating the whole thing.
exactly. You have to be careful with it.
Okay, so let's talk more about this AI frame generation, or MFG as it's called. It sounds pretty futuristic, but what are the downsides? You mentioned some earlier.
Yeah, so the main issue with MFG is something called input lag.
Input lag. Okay.
So basically, it takes a bit longer for your actions to register on screen.
Yeah.
You might notice this, especially in fast-paced games where split-second reactions are really crucial.
So, like, imagine you're playing a shooter game, and you click the mouse to fire, but there's a slight delay before your character actually shoots.
Yeah, exactly. That could be a real problem.
Yeah, not good.
And then there's the potential for visual artifacts.
Artifacts, okay.
So these are basically glitches or distortions in the image, especially when the base frame rate is low.
Ah,
So while MFG can make things look smoother, it's not perfect.
right. So more frames, but at the cost of potential lag and visual weirdness.
Yeah, it's a balancing act.
Okay, all right. So we've covered a lot of ground here. Is the 5070 worth it?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And it really comes down to your individual needs and your budget.
Okay.
If you're primarily a 1440p gamer and you want a decent upgrade, it's not a bad choice.
Yeah.
But if you're hoping for a massive performance leap or you're planning to game primarily at 4K, you might want to consider some other options.
Right. So it's not a bad card by any means,
No,
but it's not perfect either.
definitely not
It
perfect.
really comes down to your needs as a gamer.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've established that the 5070 is a decent card, but it's not without its quirks.
Yeah.
One thing that I keep coming back to is that power consumption issue. It's just weird to me that it uses more power than the 4070 Super.
Right.
When they're both built on the same 4mm process, shouldn't a newer generation be more power efficient?
You would think so, right?
You would think so.
But it seems like Nvidia has kind of prioritized performance over power efficiency with this one.
Yeah.
They've really cranked up the clock speeds and, as we've talked about, that means more power draw. It's a trade-off that they've made.
So it's like they're saying, hey, you want those extra frames, you got to pay for them in watts.
Exactly. And that might be a risky move, considering how much people are talking about energy efficiency these days.
Yeah, you're right. Energy costs are going up and people are more aware of their environmental impact. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out for NVIDIA in the long run.
Definitely.
Okay, so getting back to the Ars Technica review,
Okay.
they also took a look at the 5070's cooling system. And it sounds like they had some thoughts.
Yeah, they were testing the Founders Edition card, which is NVIDIA's reference design.
Right.
And it has a dual fan cooler, but they noticed that it ran a bit hotter and louder than some other cards that they've tested recently.
Even hotter than the 4090. That's kind of surprising.
It is a bit surprising. It could be a combination of factors. The updated cooler design might not be as efficient, or the higher power consumption could be generating more heat. It's hard to say for sure without more testing.
Yeah, it's tough to pinpoint exactly what's going on there, but it's something to keep in mind for people who are sensitive to noise or maybe have a smaller PC case with less airflow.
For sure.
So another potential issue, let's talk about memory. The 5070 comes with 12 GBs of GDDR7.
Right.
Is that enough for modern games?
It's a decent amount of memory for sure, more than enough for most games right now, especially at 1440p.
Okay.
But I think some gamers might feel a little uneasy about that 12 GB considering how demanding games are becoming.
Yeah.
I mean, some AAA titles are already recommending 16 GBs of RAM for optimal performance. So,
Kind of a question of future-proofing.
yeah, exactly. If you're planning to hold on to this card for a few years, that 12 GBs of VRAM might start to feel a little cramped.
Right, especially if you're thinking about gaming at 4K resolution.
Yeah, those high-resolution textures, they really eat up VRAM.
Yeah, they do.
So it's something to consider if you're the type of gamer who likes to max out the settings and push the limits.
Okay, so before we jump into the AMD competition, I want to circle back to NVIDIA's big claim, 4090 performance at $549.
Right.
We've talked about how that's based on AI frame generation, but can we break down how that technology actually works?
Sure. So imagine you have a video game running at, say, 60 frames per second.
Okay.
With multi-frame generation, the GPU renders every other frame.
Okay.
So in this case, it would render 30 frames.
Right.
Then the AI algorithms step in and analyze those frames,
Well,
and they predict what the missing frames should look like.
so it's like filling in the blanks, creating those extra frames based on the ones that were actually rendered.
Exactly. It's like an AI artist stepping in to complete the picture.
Wow.
And when it works well, it can make games look incredibly smooth.
But as we've discussed, there are those trade-offs The input lag can be a real deal breaker for some gamers, and those visual artifacts can be pretty distracting.
For sure, for sure. And there's another thing to keep in mind. MFG, it works best when the base frame rate is already pretty high. If you're running a game at, say, 30 frames per second and then you turn on MFG, the AI has to do a lot more heavy lifting.
So the lower the base frame rate, the more noticeable those artifacts are going to be.
Exactly. It's like asking the AI to paint half the picture instead of just filling in a few details.
Right. Okay, so MFG is a cool technology, but it's not a magic bullet.
Yeah,
It's more like a tool that can be useful in certain situations.
exactly. It's all about understanding its strengths and its limitations.
Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about the competition. AMD's Radeon RX 9070 series is hitting the market soon,
Right?
and it's going head-to-head with 5070 in terms of price.
Yeah.
What do you think this means for Nvidia?
Well, AMD has been making some serious gains in the GPU market lately.
Yeah, they have.
And they've been focusing on performance and power efficiency, which seems to be where NVIDIA might have stumbled a bit with the 5070.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a very interesting battle to watch.
Okay, so before we get into all the juicy details about the 9070 in our next episode, what are the key things you think listeners should take away from this deep dive into the 5070?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the 5070 is a solid card for 1440p gaming.
Yeah.
It delivers good performance, but it's not a massive leap forward from the previous generation.
Okay.
And you need to be aware of those trade-offs,
Right.
the higher power consumption, the potential for noise and heat, and the limitations of MFG.
Right, so it's not a bad card by any means,
No,
but it's not perfect either.
definitely not perfect.
It really comes down to your individual needs and priorities as a gamer.
Exactly. And don't get caught up in the marketing hype,
Right.
Do your research, read reviews from trusted sources like arstechnica,
Absolutely.
and make an informed decision based on your own gaming habits and your budget.
Great advice.
Yeah.
So are you ready to dive into the AMD Radeon RX 9070?
Oh, I am so ready. Let's do it.
I'm dying to see how it stacks up against the 5070. I know, right? The
Yeah.
RX 9070 could be huge. But before we get to that, I kind of want to zoom out a bit.
Okay.
We've been like dissecting the 5070 specs and everything.
Right.
But like, what does this all tell us about the bigger picture of the GPU market,
Yeah, well, I think what's really fascinating here is just how much AI is influencing graphics technology now,
Yeah.
We've got AI frame generation, we've got AI upscaling like DLSS, and who knows what's coming next. It's almost like a whole new era of gaming.
Yeah, it really feels that way.
Yeah.
It does. I mean, just a few years ago, AI in gaming was barely a thing, and now it's like front and center.
Yeah.
Do you think we'll get to a point where AI can completely make up for having a less powerful graphics card?
That's a really interesting question. Imagine a future where you could play the latest games at high settings, even with a budget-friendly GPU, because AI is doing so much of the heavy lifting.
Whoa, that would be amazing. But part of me also wonders if raw processing power will always be important. Like, will there be a limit to what AI can achieve?
I think that's the big question, and honestly, I don't have the answer.
Yeah,
But it is really exciting to think about. The possibilities are pretty much endless.
totally. I feel like we're at a turning point in PC gaming, and I'm really excited to see what happens next.
Me too.
But for now, I think we've given you a pretty solid understanding of the NVIDIA RTX 5070.
Yeah, we've covered the performance claims, the reality of those claims, and even delved into some of the trickier aspects like AI frame generation and power consumption.
Right.
So hopefully you feel well equipped to make an informed decision if you're thinking about buying this card.
Absolutely. And of course, don't forget to tune in next time when we'll be taking a deep dive into AMD's Radeon RX 9070.
Yes.
We'll be comparing it head-to-head with the 5070 and seeing if AMD can really shake things up.
I can't wait.
Should be a good one. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time for another exciting journey into the world of tech.